From the Oklahoma newsroom, it's time for the Red Zone, our weekly extended look at Oklahoma football. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio with fellow columnist Barry Trammell, OU beat writer Ryan Seibert. Guys, it's Sooners, Red Raiders in Lubbock, night game on Saturday. We can't talk about this OU Texas Tech game without talking about the last OU Texas Tech game in Lubbock. You were both there. Ryan, it was as crazy a game as maybe any of us will ever see. What stands out to you 2 years later as you think back to that game?
Well, just the wildness of all of it. Baker Mayfield, Patrick Mahomes, obviously the success that they're having now and how maybe we should have expected it after seeing that. And the fact that everybody forgets about the fantastic night that Joe Mixon put together. Had an amazing touchdown catch in that game. Over 300 total yards, just an incredible game for him. But the main thing that stands out to me from my experience was the exhaustion on the level of the defense. I mean, after this game, we saw Obo Okoronkwo carried out on a stretcher for dehydration, and the defeat from that side of the ball versus what Lincoln Riley was saying on the offensive side over how great it was.
Yeah, you can have such differing opinions in the same locker room. Barry, I mean, the numbers, you can get lost in the great numbers or bad numbers depending on your perspective from that night. There are those individual stories. What do you remember most from that night in Lubbock?
I remember just trying to keep up with the numbers. I mean, they just came flooding at us so fast. Just the 10 straight touchdown drives by the teams combined. I mean, think of the last time you saw that, which is never. Even 10 straight, 5 by the Sooners, 5 by the Raiders. Tech converted 20 of 25 third downs. The one thing I'd sort of forgotten until Lincoln mentioned it this week is that Baker Mayfield and the OU offense actually was sort of running on schedule. They called a play, it worked. A Mixon off tackle, a slant to D.D. Westbrook, a home run to Westbrook, whatever the case may be. Just what they called worked. What Tech called didn't work. It's just Pat Mahomes running around making plays and the Sooners chasing him like it's playground tag and at the end breaking your heart. So it was just a phenomenal game. Good for the Sooners that they got ahead.
Yeah.
Big key in the game at the end of the half. Tech scores with 37 seconds. I think it's 37 seconds left. Takes a lead. Takes a 1-point lead, and you think, well, Tech's going to go into the halftime ahead, but no way. I think it was a 52-yard bomb to Westbrook, and then a 23-yard touchdown pass to Nick Basquin. Sooners go into the halftime ahead. Turns out
they needed it,
and they get the one stop. After half.
That's right. The second half opened with a Tech punt. And I thought, well, this game's going to turn normal. No, it did not ever turn normal.
Guys, as these two teams get ready to play again, is it safe to say that where the Sooners are now, and maybe even to some extent where the Red Raiders are now, has some roots in what happened that night in 2006? I mean, we know obviously Oklahoma's got a defensive coordinator change in the last few weeks. But Barry, I mean, when you think about it, there were games all along the way that Sooner fans pointed to. That West Virginia game that went sideways. Baylor a few years before that when they were just throwing it all down the field, no stopping them. But do you think that Tech game influenced things differently for these teams and where they are now?
Yeah, for the Sooners for sure, because you referenced West Virginia in 12, Baylor, that was in 14. That was sort of the height of absurdity. But in 15, the Oklahoma defense was pretty good. I think it's the best in the Big 12. And they make the playoff, and you thought, this is a good foundation. You get to 16, it takes a step back, and then in Lubbock, it just completely collapses. And that was sort of the line of demarcation. Ever since then, they've had some decent games. They played well in Columbus. They, TCU twice last year. They actually made some plays in the Rose Bowl. But going back to that Lubbock game, and then when you bookend it with Texas 3 weeks ago, and that was just, that was the end. So yeah, I think that game was paramount in the ultimate demise of Mike Stoops.
We'll talk more about defense here in just a second, but Ryan, I mean, both of those defenses struggled. Tech has had struggling defense over the years, but the way Oklahoma struggled in that game defensively 2 years ago, obviously it was crazy, and yet we see what Patrick Mahomes is doing now. against NFL defenses. I'm not sure I fully appreciated how great he was, and obviously Tech as a team wasn't as good as Oklahoma, so they didn't have as many wins, that sort of thing. But he's shredding defenses that get paid to play defense in the NFL now. I mean, does that put a little different perspective at all on that game?
A little bit. I mean, clearly Oklahoma's defense wasn't any good that game or really overall sense. But Patrick Mahomes, an MVP candidate this year, just playing fantastic. I think maybe we should have seen this coming, given his performance that night and other performances for Tech. But I think a lot of people sort of wrote him off as a system quarterback, given the lineage that they had with Cliff Kingsbury, with Graham Harrell, and on and on and on, and those guys' success at the next level. But Patrick Mahomes has just been fantastic to this point in the NFL.
You talk about system. I do want to talk about things here and now, but this brings up another idea. I mean, sort of a weird scheduling fluke. Baker Mayfield and Pat Mahomes are going to play each other the day after OU and Tech play on Saturday. They're going to play on Sunday. Their NFL teams are. Are we seeing a shift? What these guys are doing and how the NFL looks at quarterbacks, do you guys feel like, Barry, I'll start with you. Do you feel like maybe they're shifting this idea of system quarterback, especially as it relates to the Big 12?
Well, I think Mahomes particularly, and Mayfield on a smaller scale, has done wonders for the Big 12 rep. In fact, yesterday in Cleveland, Baker Mayfield was asked about the Kansas City offense, not the Oklahoma offense, not the Tech offense, not the Browns offense, the Kansas City offense, and said, "Hey, it looks like it's got some air raid elements." And Baker Mayfield said it does. Much of what the Chiefs do is similar to what Lincoln Riley does. And so I think we know that the NFL sort of has. It's sort of flipped, that in recent years the NFL is borrowing from the colleges. In the old days, the colleges borrowed from the NFL. Yeah. It's gone the other way now, and certainly the offensive ingenuity of people like Lincoln Riley have affected the NFL, and they're looking at people different, and that's going to help this whole quarterback reputation in the Big 12.
Well, and that brings us back full circle to this week, Ryan, because now we see after Cleveland fires their head coach, Lincoln Riley's name is one of the first to pop up.
Two Big 12 coaches, Lincoln Riley and Matt Campbell, are among the first names that have been mentioned.
But Campbell is a guy that is much more defensive-minded. Right. That almost is sort of old school NFL, if you will. I mean, the fact that Lincoln Riley, an air raid disciple coach, would be in the mix, it's all about offense with him and how the NFL really likes what he's doing.
Yeah, I think there's been no doubt about that, given the NFL teams that came to visit Oklahoma over the offseason and try to pick Lincoln Riley's brain about some of the offensive concepts that he likes to use. There can be some parallels made between McVay at the Rams and what Lincoln Riley does in a lot of ways, especially being young, sort of thought of as mastermind coaches. And like Barry said, it's shifting. The NFL is stealing from colleges, and colleges we've seen on some level, even steal down to the high school level with some of the innovations that we've seen. I go back to my days in Arkansas when Gus Malzahn got plucked up, and how that sort of shifted a lot of things with the hurry up, no huddle that he ran. So it's really interesting to see the evolution of that and how the things that we've seen in the Big 12 for so long now, going on 20 years, are making their way into the NFL.
You wonder too, and I want to get to this week. I want to get to these teams, but you wonder.
Yeah, there is a game on Saturday.
I know. But you wonder if, as you see these scores in the NFL, like the Chiefs games always seem to be in the 30s and 40s. Nobody seems to be complaining about bad defenses in the NFL playing Pat Mahomes. You wonder, things like the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, which often talks about Big 12 defenses, are they sitting around watching these NFL teams struggle against these guys and thinking, oh, well, maybe if, Oklahoma State or Texas struggles against these guys, maybe that's not such a big deal anymore, Barry?
Yeah, I think you're probably right that there is a little bit of a shift. In fact, on the College Football Playoff teleconference this week, I asked Rob Mullins, hey, in the past, when you guys have listed what's wrong with Oklahoma, what's good about them, but what's bad about them, it's always, that defense is a little shaky. You didn't do that this year. What is that a change in shifting? He didn't really answer the question, but he also didn't bash the OU defense. So to me, that's a good sign. Here's the truth. In all sports, you have shifts in offense and defense. The rules makers are always pushing offense. The defense always catches up. We see it in baseball with the home run explosions in the 20s, in the 50s and early 60s, in the 90s, and then you see.
Well, we know what happened in the 90s.
Yes, but it was still. I mean, they still were booming anyway, even without the help of the steroids. But then the pitchers catch up. In the NBA, we see it with the Thunder in the NBA today. I mean, they're changing the rules. Hey, defense, back off. In the NFL and college football, you see it. The rules are created to help the offense. And we're seeing it more so in the NFL. You're right, Jacko. The numbers in the NFL are crazy.
Yeah.
The Chiefs' offense is not that far behind Oklahoma's offense in terms of efficiency, and the Sooners are just killing people. I mean, so it's an amazing phenomenon. I think if the people in that room are smart, they will understand the change that's going on.
Yeah, if the Chiefs were playing in college with the timing rules and things like that, their games would get stretched out and they'd be scoring as much as Oklahoma.
Right.
Well, let's talk about defense since we've kind of been tiptoeing around it. But this will be game 3 under Ruff and McNeil in the new defensive simplified scheme. Ryan, as you think about big picture defense at Oklahoma, what do you put your finger on as far as trying to gauge just the level of improvement we've seen out of that group?
Well, there's a big question over how much they've improved, and I think we'll find that out this week with that game down in Lubbock because Texas Tech can test, especially a secondary, much better than TCU or Kansas State. But there are a couple signs that lead me to believe that the Sooners defense is improved, and that's one, better tackling. We're not seeing the big missed tackles that lead to touchdowns, things like that. There's one missed tackle that I can really remember last week, and I'm sure there were others, but they sort of get lost in a crowd because those guys get brought down really quickly afterwards versus before where the missed tackles would pile up and they pop 20, 30, 40 extra yards. And the other is the defense hasn't been running around looking like they have no clue what they're doing right before the snap a lot of the times. We've seen Oklahoma really struggle with defensive timeouts over the last few years as they've been scrambling around at various points of a game, trying to get set before a snap. Yeah. We haven't seen that, and I think that's credit to Ruff and McNeil and the simplification that we've talked about. They make a call, get it in quick, and the defense quickly knows where to be versus some of the things that were happening under Mike Stoops.
Is there any cause for concern in your mind, Barry? I mean, I think what Ryan says is right. There's a lot of signs of improvement, but yet, I think about when TCU changed quarterbacks and started winging it around with a guy who could throw it. You saw Oklahoma's defense give up some touchdowns. Even last week against K-State, there was a possession. It was the lone touchdown. I understand it was the lone touchdown against the starting defense. But they scored with a decent amount of pass. A team that doesn't pass a lot was using sort of that short intermediate pass to move down the field. Any concern that against Tech, a team that throws it, knows how to throw it, wants to throw it, that could be a real problem area still for this defense?
Well, sure. Let's not pretend at all that all of a sudden we got the McNeil curtain. That that Ruffin's defense is all of a sudden going to be like Alabama's or Georgia's or LSU's. That's not happening. But the simplification is a huge thing. I do think this goes back a decade. This goes back to even the Brent Venables days when people, I know nobody wants to admit it, but OU fans used to be upset with Brent Venables when he was coordinator. There too much thinking going on, too much shifting right as the ball is snapped. The simplification will help. Now, what's interesting is Kansas State and TCU are two of the poorest throwing teams in the Big 12, no doubt about it. The good news for Oklahoma is this isn't the Mahomes-Mayfield heyday of the Big 12. It's not 2008 when you had 4 or 5 NFL quarterbacks. No. It's not a great year for Big 12 quarterbacking. When they play West Virginia, that's going to be a concern. When they play Tech on Saturday, it's somewhat of a concern. But this Tech offense, let's not pretend they're Mahomes or even the air raids before them. This Tech offense is a middle-of-the-road offense. It can throw it around, but it's a freshman quarterback. I'm anxious to see how this OU defense responds. They could get lit up. They also could make life a little miserable for Alan Bowman because, like I said, this is not a pristine Tech offense.
Well, and then you have the added storyline, Ryan, of Ruffin McNeil back to Lubbock for the first time in quite a few years. I mean, he not only returning as the defensive coordinator, but a guy that, spent a lot of time there, was an interim head coach for a little bit there. So some deep ties to Lubbock for Ruffin McNeil.
Yeah, I mean, this will be his first time since that Alamo Bowl game where Lincoln Riley was his interim offensive coordinator, and they beat Michigan State after Mike Leach's dismissal there. So Ruffin McNeil and Lincoln Riley talked about that this week, their affinity for Lubbock, their affinity for Texas Tech, and just how important that place was to building their relationship. Obviously, that's where they met and where that bond occurred. But Ruffin McNeil's pretty excited to head back to Lubbock as Oklahoma's defensive coordinator.
Before we get to picks, guys, and we'll maybe talk about how excited Ruffin McNeil should be, are they going to be able to hold down this Tech offense? A milestone of sorts coming up for Austin Seibert, the kicker. You don't often have top of the list, Ryan, and Austin Seibert is soon to achieve that spot, right?
Yeah, I think he's 12 points away from breaking Michael Honeycutt's OU all-time scoring record. His first extra point on Saturday will be the NCAA record for both makes and attempts, assuming he makes it. But at some point, he's going to make one. So just an incredible career for Austin Seibert, and I think he obviously, he benefits from Oklahoma's offense and what it's been the last 4 seasons. Mm-hmm. But I think Austin Seibert's contribution to this team sort of gets overlooked because he's so reliable. When he messes up, say that field goal against Army there at the end, it really gets magnified. But he's been fantastic in the kicking game, fantastic at kickoffs, fantastic at punting. And let's remember where OU was in some of those places before he got there. They were pretty good, obviously, in kicking with Honeycutt at times, but there were also times when those positions were a mess. Yeah. And Seibert's really stabilized that position for 4 seasons.
Barry, does the fact that Seibert is the Swiss Army knife of kicking for the Sooners, does that part add to what he's done and what he's going to do? I mean, there's still a lot of games left this season, so who knows where that record ultimately stands. But the fact that he does it all for them, does that add to just where he's going on those career charts?
Oh, I guess. It's not as valuable if you do it in college as if you do it in the NFL. If you do it in the NFL, you're saving roster spots. You're not really doing that in college. He's done a very good job. It's a little bit of a risk. I asked Lincoln about that this week. If Austin Seibert pulls a hamstring in the first quarter at Lubbock, they got 3 holes they got to fill. Yeah. And so it's a little bit of a risk, but he's answered the call. He hasn't gotten hurt, so he's done a good job. He's the beneficiary of this offensive explosion. He's playing when he gets to trot out about every 4 minutes, kick an extra point, so that helps. But what I want to see out of Austin Seibert, and it may not happen, but I want him, if he's called upon to make a field goal, that he has to have.
Game winner.
A game winner. Mm-hmm. We saw him not do it at Army. We saw him get one blocked in the Rose Bowl that was paramount, a tie game, second overtime. I have no idea whose fault it was at Pasadena, but this Oklahoma football program has gone years and years and years without making a field goal it had to have. And I'd like to see that if the situation arises. That's what I want to see out of Austin Seibert.
All right, well, maybe this week, but our picks would suggest otherwise. Ryan, I think we've all got a double-digit win for the Sooners, but you've got Oklahoma 51-34. Break it down for us.
Well, I think Oklahoma's going to score a lot of points. We've seen that. There's no reason to think otherwise, although Tech's defense is a little bit better than it's been the last few years. Oklahoma's been scoring a lot of points on even really good defenses. And on the other side, I think Texas is going to score some points. I think they're going to have some success, especially matching up against Oklahoma's secondary. But Oklahoma's defense is going to come up with enough stops to make this a relatively comfortable margin.
I've got 52-34, so you and I are right there on par together. Bear, you're a little tighter, but not too much. 48-35 Sooners.
Yeah, and most of what I'm going is on how many possessions. You know, the Sooners are actually not, they're not like the old Kevin Wilson days where they're getting 15, 16 possessions a game. Their hurry up is not in that big of a hurry. And I don't think Tech is going to be in any big hurry to try to lengthen the game. So I don't think Sooners are going to get a ton of possessions. 11 or 12 is my guess. And if you do, you know, I think 7 touchdowns is about what they'll score. Now, if it gets into the 14 range, they're not stopping Oklahoma. So, I mean, that number will rise into the 50s and could approach the 60s. So it's just, can Tech keep up? I don't think so. That's more an indication that Tech's offense is just so-so this year. Nice OU defense, revival, but I don't think they're shutting people down. I think that the conditions of the game are going to create something like 48-35.
If you guys get to 14 or 15 possessions, you're going to be there at midnight still watching live football action.
But don't say that. I mean, 2 years ago, what was that, 4 hours and 10 minutes?
Yeah, it
Is
ended
that right?
11-10, I think it ended.
It wasn't too incredible.
It was a fast track meet, at least. If you're going to
Yeah, but there were 11 possessions in the second half of that game. Or no, 12 possessions, right? Because there was
OU ran the clock out.
Ran the clock out.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it's easy to remember because there were 10 touchdown possessions, the punt, and the running the clock out at the end.
Well, let's hope for a slightly shorter game on Saturday night. 7 o'clock start, though, out in Lubbock. ABC is where you can check that out, see how long it lasts, and see how many points are scored. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoma.